Who introduces it then?
I was thinking this. We probably should have.
Who introduces this?
We probably should have prepared some kind of formal introduction.
Quite possibly. I'll do it.
Okay, you go.
So,
You go.
hi, I'm including all of that. Like, I'm just going to include everything that makes it
This is our first
feel
one.
as comfortable as possible.
Yeah.
I'm going to say placeholder name. I don't know how set on is Yellow Couch Film Talks.
It's
Yellow Couch, yellow. So.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Working title.
Like it. I love this couch.
Yellow Couch.
Yellow Couch Film Talks.
Except I'm on a red beanbag.
Yeah. So we know. We know who the star is.
Yeah.
Really.
Fugs.
But we have room for guests.
Fugs Malone.
We have room. Yeah. Fugs Malone. He thought he was going to stay anonymous. He asked to stay anonymous.
He's our guest speaker today.
Okay. So, what are we talking about?
We are talking about Malignant. Malignant, the latest James Wan horror film. He directed it. He did not write it, but
he has a writing credit.
He has a writing credit in terms of he helped create the story, he helped shape the story, and he directed it. He also produced it, but he did not actually write the script. But it is, for all intents and purposes, the latest James Wan horror film. It was released, I think, all over, a couple of weeks ago? It's a brand new film.
I know it's, at least in America, it's gone to streaming and cinemas, which I think, for starters, like, is it actually a horror film?
Is it a horror film?
Is it a horror film?
Okay, so yes, for me, yes, it is a horror film. It is scary. It genuinely is quite horrifying. Yeah. It has gore. I know gore can be a tricky thing when you talk about horror. Gore is not always scary.
Yeah.
But I think the sheer nature... We should also probably say we are going to talk about spoilers.
Yeah, we'll
this
do
film.
A spoiler warning.
We'll do a spoiler warning. Like, right away we won't, but yeah, at some point we will have to talk about certain scenes.
Yeah.
But the sheer subjects and concept of the story is horrifying. What the main character has to go through, I would say. It does make it constitute as a horror film. So yeah, I would say so. And just off the bat, I also really enjoyed it.
So did I. I think what's baffled me about this film, and I don't know how intentional it is, but this year, it seems to be quite polarizing. People either love it or absolutely hate it. But I also think, like, I'm going to compare, this will be the only time I'd compare it to this film, but I'm going to compare Malignant to Darren Aronofsky's Mother.
Mm-hmm.
Which I didn't like, that story for another day. Mainly because they were both films that were massively mismarketed.
Yeah.
Malignant is marketed like a stereotypical James Wan horror. To anyone out there who doesn't know, see James Wan with some friends, like mainly with Lee Winnell and Warner Bros. Always at the helm.
Mm-hmm.
The Saw, he established the Saw franchise and the Conjuring universe. So he's a pretty well known director. He also made one where it was $1 billion with Aquaman.
Yeah.
So this is one of those films where it's like, I want to do something a bit different, and they're like, do whatever you want. Here's some money, just do whatever you want. But they clearly, like with Mother, they get the film out and like, how the fuck do we market this?
Yeah.
So they marketed that as a horror film, and it wasn't. It's the same with Malignant. They've marketed it like a traditional James Wan supernatural. And I think that's the key word, supernatural horror.
Yeah.
And it's not. It absolutely isn't. A lot of the audience can feel a bit lied to.
I think that's a major factor as to why it is so polarizing.
Its core actually isn't supernatural.
It's not
in any way.
It's not supernatural in any.
It's more body horror.
This is a violent movie.
Yeah, it's a very, very.
It is. It deserves its 18 rating in the UK.
Well, we're on YouTube. We have to talk about we have to say whatever YouTuber said about it. It feels very much inspired by Italian Giallo. Giallo films.
I have made some notes about Giallo.
I have not made notes.
To talk about... So Giallo is very much a style, I would say, as opposed to an outright genre. Yeah, it's an Italian style. Giallo literally means yellow in Italian, and the origins are these yellow mystery, Yellow Coach Talks. Is Yellow these kind of mystery pulp detective novels that were published back in the 60s and the 70s? It literally means yellow. So Giallo horror films became a thing in the 70s and they kind of have certain elements that you can distinctly say, yes, this is a Giallo horror. Like, it's a crime story. There's a detective murder mystery involved. They are very violent. Sometimes they're very erotic. They usually end with the killer being unmasked at the end. You have unusual camera work in these films. You have kind of jarring, weird music choices in the films. Like,
overacting as well.
A lot. It's kind of campy overacting. It's like there's a lot of things going on there, but it's more like when you watch a Giallo horror, it's more just kind of a thing, you know, you're watching a Giallo horror because of all these different weird factors attached to them.
Like, James Wan has said he wanted to do something different. Thing is, like,
he succeeded.
When you look at his career, he starts franchises.
Yeah.
I don't know if this can become a franchise. It's like Giallo themes mixed in with his very polished filmmaking style.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the opening for starters.
Let's talk about the opening.
Right.
Spoilers.
We're going into minor spoilers and then we'll go into like
spoilers.
This film opens like a traditional, I'm going to say traditional Conjuring film. We have the house. So what a lot of people pointed out, the same house that James Wan seems to use in all of his films.
Yeah.
Which are just quite humorously. Is larger on the inside than it is on the outside. It's a set.
Oh, yeah.
We know it has to be, but
you talked to me about this.
Yeah, it's like the TARDIS. The house. That house is massive on the inside. We see the outside.
It's a very typical James Wan inspired house. It's like if you've seen Insidious, if you've seen The Conjuring, when you look at the house in Malignant, you're like, this is a James Wan movie.
Yeah, this is.
It could very well just be the same house that he used for all of those films.
Yeah.
It's not. It is a different set.
But then you have something goes bump in the night. You have a character going through the house. You have the very James Wan making the house a bit of a character.
Yeah,
going around,
absolutely.
strange things happen. Things which look supernatural, which in hindsight actually don't make a lot of sense as to how they're happening.
Yeah.
So this is the thing with this film, like how much of it is intentional and how much of it isn't. Like some of the overacting, how much is intentional. I think he intentionally set it up to look like a traditional James Wan Conjuring film.
I agree with that.
And then by the end of that seems like,
oh,
what just happened? And then then you end up cutting to the hospital and it's like, what do we start at the hospital?
I think we start at the hospital.
Yeah, I've completely messed that up.
No, we start at the hospital back in time in the early 90s. We see.
This is why you write notes. We start in the hospital, then we have the ridiculous title sequence. Then the film opens.
We do, yeah.
In the house, and by the end of that scene, you realize, oh wait, this isn't James Wan Conjuring movie.
It's not at all.
He kind of like the trailer. James Wan sets us up to lie to us.
Yeah, I think you could be forgiven. Well, when we went to see this film, we should say we went in completely blind. We knew nothing beyond what we had seen in the trailer. We did not have any spoilers for this movie. When we were watching it in the cinema, for the first maybe half an hour, I was waiting for the supernatural stuff to happen. I thought it was going to be a supernatural ghost story because, again, that's what the trailer kind of insinuated. It was a lot of the stuff that happens in the house with the main character, who's played by Annabelle Wallis. You could be forgiven for thinking, oh, this is going to be a ghost story.
Yeah.
And he completely does a 180 on that. Like, he deliberately, I think, tricks the audience.
Yeah.
Which, again, I think is a lot of reasons why some people did not like this film. Because not only does he kind of trick you, but it is quite an outrageously kind of ridiculous movie in a way.
I've seen a lot of online. Like, now we're getting into heavy spoilers.
Yeah.
So that's your spoiler warning. Like, big spoiler drop. There's a bloody face on the back of her head. Before on the film, I heard snippets of people saying, "Oh, the prison scene."
The prison scene.
And I think everyone assumed the film's full of too much CG. It's like, it's actually not.
No, it's not at all.
There is CG in this film, undoubtedly, but I think looking at it, because it's so the contortions they use to do a lot of the backwards movements.
Yeah, I've got some notes about her.
It looks so unnatural that people assume it's CG, and then people assume it's not real.
Yeah.
And even there's so much practical elements in it.
Yeah.
But because it's so jarring, people assume that it's CG and then assume that it's also bad.
Yeah.
Whereas you're actually just looking at something that you might not necessarily see anything before, so you don't know how to process it.
Yeah. So should we talk about the basic plot of the film? just the bare bones of what the story is about.
A very brief.
So it's essentially about this young woman. She lives in a house with her husband, who turns out is a bit of a bastard. He is a domestic abuser. We begin the film where she is clearly very heavily pregnant, and she comes home from work because baby's making her feel a bit sick. He references the fact that she's had several miscarriages in the past. They have a fight, and he very, very violently shoves her against the wall. She whacks her head in the bedroom wall, and that kind of then kickstarts the film. Husband, she then locks him out of the bedroom. She has a dream that
I don't think we want to go too much into
no. But
that is kind of like the event that starts kickstarting.
That's the scene that starts the film. It transpires. She starts having visions of people, specifically doctors, being murdered.
Yeah.
And these visions happen to come true, and it turns out that she has a parasitic twin attached to the back of her head that was medically separated at birth somewhat, but they couldn't separate all of Gabriel, who is the twin, and the whack to the head has triggered Gabriel coming alive again. It's woken him up.
I have to say, I love Gabriel as a character.
Gabriel is
cool. I thought he was
cool.
such a unique, well, I say unique, it's I have not seen this, but you compare it a lot to Basket Case. But I still think, from what I've seen of Basket Case, I still feel like he's quite unique.
He is unique. I would say Basket Case walked so Gabriel could run. That's what I will say. Okay. Even like the core plot of Basket Case is quite similar. So I don't want to give you spoilers for Basket Case.
I've actually watched that.
But the idea of this twin who wants revenge for his life so far, it is very similar. But interestingly, I've been looking online for interviews with James Wans, and I don't think he's referenced Basket Case. So I genuinely don't know if it was like a thing he's seen. It's just curious. He's never actually mentioned it before. He's mentioned Giallo a lot, but he hasn't mentioned Basket Case.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to what was intentional, what wasn't. James Wans' wife is in this film, who was previously was very briefly in The Nun, wasn't she?
Your favourite horror film of all time.
It's awful.
We should do a video about The Nun at some point.
No, I'm going to spoil that video right now. The first time you see our main character see The Nun, she literally tells them how to defeat her. So
there's a video for another day. David despises The Nun.
That's where they met.
She's not the nun, but she is a nun in that film. That is how they met. They married. She's called Ingrid Bisu.
I think she actually has a writing credit on this as well.
She has a story by credit. She actually came up with the plot line for this film.
I think I've seen her act. She does not act in this film. But with it being inspired by Giallo, how much of that is intentional? I also don't think her storyline warrants being in the film.
See, okay.
Is it even a storyline?
There's a lot. I have written down some notes about the general plot of this film. As much as I did love this film, I will watch it again. I think it's a great James Wan film. There's a lot of things that I dislike about this film. Her character is one of them. Yeah. I don't think she's very necessary. I think the whole kind of...
I really like the detective.
I like the detective.
As far as police go, he was very competent.
I like the detective. Again, kind of harking back to the Giallo thing, we've got to have detectives in a Giallo-inspired film. We've got two detectives, mainly. We've got the man and we've got the woman.
One that believes and one doesn't.
Yeah, we've got I love seeing like American cops in films. They're always fun characters. But yeah, we've got one detective who's very kind of sarcastic. She's very kind of hard-boiled. She's seen everything. She's done everything. She hasn't got a lot of patience for anyone and is a total disbeliever in the supernatural. But then you've got the male detective who is a little bit more open to the paranormal, I guess. And he's more patient and he's more willing to believe Annabelle Wallace's character.
Well, he just can't believe because he goes come face to face and has a full
he
chase
also
sequence
does
through the
have a full chase sequence with Gabriel. But
he mainly believes because the situation leads him to believing.
Yes.
But he still struggles with comprehending.
Which is a nice touch, I thought, from James Wan. Because he very easily could have just had the cops disbelieve her throughout the entire film. But the fact that you make the cop halfway have an actual encounter with the killer.
Yeah, that chase sequence is amazing.
Yeah. It's also, so I was just going to say, remember Insidious, the first film? I always remember James Wan talking about how his biggest gripe in haunted house movies is why don't they just move out the house? Like, as
But
soon
they
as
did.
creepy
They
stuff...
did move.
They moved. He completely solved that problem. So you couldn't have audiences complaining that this family was doing the wrong thing. It's a similar thing. Like, this guy knows horror, and he knows what people are going to see. Yeah.
Even if, like, personally, I wasn't a massive fan of Aquaman, but I watched that and I can tell this is still a good movie. It's constructed very... The guy knows how to make films. He's proven he can step outside of horror and do very well.
He does.
As well.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a few things in the film that I think, did we need that? Like, her character, it's a bit silly. It's kind of a little bit pointless. You've got the flirtation between the main character's sister and the policeman.
Yeah, see, I didn't mind that too much.
It doesn't really go anywhere,
It doesn't, no.
It's not necessary for the film. It adds a little bit of comedic value to the movie, but generally it's like, the film doesn't need it to be there. I did, however, really
like her sister.
She was cool.
I liked her.
She was cool, yeah. I actually like the acting in this film, just around the clock, is pretty good.
It's pretty good, yeah. Apart from the overacting bits where it's like, again, how much of it is necessary?
Well, this is a good point, because, again, talking about Giallo, and this is a Giallo-inspired movie, how much pre-existing knowledge do you need of that in order to appreciate this film, if any, at all?
See, other than knowing what it was, I didn't have any and I enjoyed this film.
Yeah, same.
Like...
I'll be totally honest, I only made the connection this was a Giallo-inspired movie when I started doing research into it.
Yeah.
I did not know that going in.
I think...
I still love the shit out of it.
I've done a lot of scouring the internet to see people's reactions.
Yeah.
And I see two different opinions. I see Facebook comments in horror groups that despise... They seem to be mainly negative. A lot of... I turned it off after 20 minutes. I walked out. I'm sorry, if you walk out of the movie, you have absolutely no right to comment on said movie.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what happens.
Yeah.
But they seem to be mainly negative. But on the likes of, like, YouTube reviews, if you go into the comments, they seem to be mainly filled with positive. Obviously, if you're not going to search for a 40-minute long review of a film if you don't like it or are curious by it. But it's a strange, like, you can see that there are, like, if you just looked at one, like Facebook, for example, you'd assume that nobody liked this film. But then if you look on YouTube, you still see there are a lot of people that didn't like it, but there is a big community that support this film.
Yeah, massively. As of today, I think it still has 76% on Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah. It hasn't done particularly great at the box office, but it's still quite a new film.
Thing is, like, it went to HBO Max as well.
Yeah.
How many people have just watched that at home?
Yeah, I guess in the cinema as well. It's also James Wans' first R-rated movie in a while.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah, it was R-rated.
It is, yeah, and it deserves it.
Oh yeah, it absolutely. The violence in this film was great. It was so violent.
The gore is cool. There's you kind of mentioned there's a particular chase sequence and fight sequence that ensues, which is just amazing.
It isn't gory, but it's so
very well done.
Unique. I've never seen a chase sequence like that. Even like chase sequence always have a part where a character kind of runs around a corner and suddenly that's it, it's over. No, he keeps going.
No, it keeps going.
He keeps going until there's literally a point where he cannot follow anymore.
Keeps going.
At a point, it's like, oh, it's gone through there, it's gone over there. It's like, oh, he's going to stop. Oh no, he's going to keep going. It's like, I wish police were this competent.
But again, I think that's like a classic example of James Wan. This is not just a guy who's trying to cash in on making a horror movie. This is a guy who knows
this film
horror.
Was a risk.
Yeah, but this is a guy who knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's playing with the audience here.
I love James Wan for his camera work.
Yeah.
I think he always treats the camera and the house is always a character.
Oh, massively,
and one of my favourite shots in any of his films is in this film. And you know which one I mean.
I know.
We have a top-down, obviously, of the house set of her running through the house. And it's following her room to room from the ceiling, even upstairs. I think that looked incredible.
It did look very cool.
Really, it was such a well...
Would you like to have seen more of that in the film?
No, I think as a one-off shot it kind of works, but I can't think of a scene that would have any other scene that would have benefited from that.
Yeah, but he does like to use a lot of practical effects.
He does.
Where he can.
That's where I think this film, it does shine. The contortionist, what, do you have a name?
She's called Marina Mazepa. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but yeah, she is Gabriel. So any kind of fight sequence that we see, any kind of movement where Gabriel is running, he's fighting, he's killing, that is this woman, very young woman called Marina Mazeppa. She's a contortionist dancer. She was discovered on America's Got Talent in 2014. She's only 24 years old. And James Wan has used her in another film, I think, but he said in an interview that he was getting a bit stressed out in terms of how they were going to make Gabriel perform. He thought they'd have to film everything backwards. Because again, remember, Gabriel is attached to the back of her head.
Kind of similar to Tenet.
Kind of similar to Tenet.
Going backwards.
Yeah. But it turns out he didn't have to do that because Marina performed and learned all her fight choreography backwards. She just learned how to do it in camera. So every time you see Gabriel, there's literally no CG, I think. You know, it's all in the performance, basically.
An animatronic face on the back of her as well.
She does. So Annabelle Wallis, who plays Maddie, the main character, they made a cast of her face and they put that on the back of Marina's.
There's someone separately controlling that. So personally, I think while I was going, I didn't notice the face moving. I suppose it's one of those things, if you went by frame, you would notice, like, oh, it is a face and it is.
Yeah.
A lot of the fight scenes. Did you ever watch Upgrade? No. It's something that Lee Winnell made. And that has a lot of. That's basically someone who has a chip in them. That's upgraded. Because I believe he's paralysed. Don't quote me on that. But this chip starts to take over. And in order to show that this character wasn't in control, like say if the character, I'm going to use Bugs as an example here, if the character falls down like that, the camera falls with them. Okay. And up. So it's kind of like the camera follows all his movements, very jarring. So it gives the feeling that he's not in control. A lot of the camera movements felt very similar for Gabriel. Like when they're doing moves that the cops can't do, like surprise because contortionist going backwards and everything. I could feel the camera moving with it. It felt. I mean, obviously James Wan and Lee Winnell.
They are the same person.
Created 3 very popular franchises together. Yeah. So I quite like that he got inspired by something that his friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think it adds to it. Although they definitely made the police station as big as they did, so they could have that particular scene.
Yes. It's a hell of a sequence, though.
Oh, it is. I will watch this again. Absolutely, I will watch.
I will watch it again. I thought I'm not gonna lie. The domestic violence in this movie, which is
very tough. It's hard to watch.
It's a very hard watch. I mean, it doesn't. It's pretty much just the beginning of the film. It's like maybe the first 5-10 minutes of the movie, but. Yeah, you do get a warning in the cinema as well. It does let you know that it does flag that there is domestic violence in it. Anything to do with a pregnancy and a husband that abuses the wife and the baby, it just made me really uncomfortable. And there was a really horrible moment in the cinema where when he hits her, I genuinely thought he punched her in the belly, and I remember I was nearly tearing up in the cinema. It really, really got me. He didn't. He punched her in the face. Which is just as horrible, but yeah, it's not an easy watch at the beginning.
I think a lot of scenes just throughout aren't an easy.
No, the kills in this film are awesome.
I love it. It is. Yeah. It's amazing. Like, just thinking because we've been watching that Friday the 13th documentary. And a lot of those films were always at the bane of the ratings board. Yeah. Having the cut out violence documentary. What you can get away with today in a film compared to the 70s and 80s is insane.
It is insane.
I got the Friday the 13th would probably be a 15 now.
Yeah.
Whereas they were borderline on, at the time, almost X-rated.
Yeah. The greatest enemy of any horror film, particularly in the 70s and 80s, was the ratings board. Yeah. Definitely. Absolutely. That's what I have learned in loving this genre.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so we were fans.
I loved it.
I can understand why some people wouldn't like it. It's not a gateway horror. I wouldn't suggest this be if you've never watched a horror film before. I don't think you should watch this first. I think a lot of people just didn't get it.
I think
or just haven't gave it enough.
Yeah.
Time.
Again, it's very much been marketed to me as a very standard James Wan supernatural film. It is not that in any way.
I actually assumed that it was going to be a Conjuring universe film.
I thought it was going to be a supernatural haunted house movie, and I would have loved the shit out of that as well, because that's what James Wan does really well, in my opinion.
He does do really well.
I still really would have loved it, but it takes a turn and then it takes such a turn.
Yeah.
You've not quite seen anything like this before.
It doesn't hide from what it is. It takes a dive and then it just keeps going.
There's a really nice quote that I found from James Wan, and he's talking about himself, and he's like, he became the torture porn guy with Saw. That's what obviously kind of kickstarted his career. And then he did Insidious, he did The Conjuring, and then he says, I became the scary ghost jump scare guy. And he never really intended to. So Malignant was very much his way of trying deliberately to do something very different. Yeah. He was trying to go against type.
Well, it's like even doing something like, I think he did a Fast and Furious film, and by doing Aquaman, that went against what he'd done previously. He is constantly recreating himself. Is he one of the most reliable directors in Hollywood at the minute?
I think so. I think he's obviously known in the horror community.
Yeah.
I don't think like maybe the standard cinema goer, like the average cinema goer who's not as much into horror will probably recognise his name.
No, but I guarantee they'll have seen at least one of his films.
Guarantee at least one. Yeah. I think he's in such like a great place in his career at the moment. I mean, he's just... I love James Wan. I will always watch his movies.
Yeah. It's like, we know he has Aquaman 2 coming up, then what's he going to do after that?
What is he going to do? I mean, again, in doing a lot of research into the guy, he has said, like, horror is my genre. I will always come back to this genre.
I know he said that he would love to come back to the Saw franchise if they allowed him to do something completely different with it.
One thing you and me talked about, and we talked about it quite a bit, actually, but are we going to see a lot more horrors set in the 90s?
Yes.
A lot more films in general set in the 90s?
It's that 30-year rule. A lot of people that grew up in the 90s are now starting to make films. You make films based on your childhood. You know that the best. Obviously, it's all the 80s in it. I don't think 80s space films are going to go away.
No.
Even people who didn't grow up in the 80s know the 80s. But
the 80s
because this film it does open in the 90s. There was a lot of this film set in the 90s.
1993. We start in 1993, which shit you up a little bit because I remember when it jumped to present day and it was like 30 years on.
Yeah.
That gave you a scare.
That shit me up a bit.
It did.
A bit of a moment.
It did. The scariest thing in the film.
It's one of the first films I've seen
that film aged
set
you.
in 1999, partially. Or how that has its origins. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
80s is obviously going through.
Fear Street, the first one was set in the 90s.
It was, 94.
Yeah. So that's two big films we've seen this year that have been set in the early 90s.
80s has obviously had a huge renaissance. Like, I think Stranger Things
was a big one.
Kicked that off. But then we also had It, Chapter 1, set in the 80s. Everyone loved that. Summer of 84, another example in horror. Yeah. That's a great film. People love seeing the 80s come back to life.
Talk about that film.
Yeah, we will. But I totally agree. I think we are slowly starting to see the 90s kind of become more of a common backdrop. And I think we will continue to see.
I really like this film, but I get why people didn't like it.
Same. I think it's a multiple of different reasons why. I don't think it's one particular thing why people didn't like it. I think it didn't meet people's expectations. It just was totally very different from what they ever expected it to be. But I liked it a lot, and I will rewatch it.
Yeah, I will
again.
Absolutely rewatch it. So if you like your James Wan, you like your horror, go give Malignant a try. If you get put off by the first 10-ish minutes,
stick it out.
Power through.
Stick it out.
But don't just walk out the cinema.
No. Also, cinema tickets are expensive. Don't waste your money like that.
How many people?
Especially if you bought snacks.
How many people who say they walked out the cinema actually did it?
Yeah, bullshit. No one did.
I call bull.
we do call bullshit.
So, I like to think that's episode 1 done. What films do you want to talk about? Next, what do you want to come up? Like, basically, because we just rewatched it, I want to watch the original Friday the 13th. I'll talk about the original Friday the 13th.
I would love that. There's a lot to talk about with the Friday movies.
Yeah.
I personally love Scream.
Scream?
I would love to do the Scream franchise, especially as there's...
in its entirety.
In its complete entirety. We've got Scream 5 coming out in cinemas soon. There's a lot of topics, generally, we would like to talk about, too.
Yes, a lot of topics.
But yeah, we are open to a lot of suggestions.
I also really want to talk... Well, we're going to watch Slumber Party Massacre, so I feel like I want to talk about that.
We are going to watch Slumber Party Massacre, which is a riot.
I've heard...
Especially 2.
Look, so I might do one on just those, the two, might do 2 together. I want to do Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
Yeah.
Because I think it's one of the most unique films in slashers.
Yeah.
It pulls apart a lot of slashers. It kind of does, because we have a lot of films today that do kind of pick apart horror genres, but that does it in a very particular way, so I would very much like to talk about that.
Yeah, that would be a really fun one to do.
It would be.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Listen to us blabble for... We've blabbled on for, before editing, half an hour. We've had a camera die.
Yeah.
Your brew's probably gone cold.
It has gone a little bit cold.
But yeah, welcome to the Yellow Couch.